Why are you ignoring us, Sarah? How many times do I have to tell you? I told you to make dinner. I was on the phone with my mother, who was crying and telling me that my father had passed away. My heart felt heavy, but my mother-in-law mocked me, saying my crying was unnecessary and annoying. She treated the news of my father's passing as if it was insignificant, demanding I focus on making dinner instead. I was furious, but held back. I went to another room to continue my phone call with my mother. To my shock, my mother-in-law, Emily, poured a glass of ice water on me. My father-in-law, Brian, joined in, laughing loudly at my expense. Why don't you join your father in cremation? Something snapped inside me at that moment. I quietly thought to myself, understood, and made the dinner they demanded. Later that night, while they were asleep, I packed my belongings and returned to my parents' home to attend my father's funeral. However, my in-laws weren't going to let things go so easily. They showed up at my parents' house with my husband to confront me. But my mother and I had already prepared a plan to deal with them. My name is Sarah Wilson. I'm 29 years old. Before diving into what happened, let me tell you a bit about my upbringing. My parents owned and operated a thriving diner, and I practically grew up there. Regular customers adored me, treating me as the little mascot of the place. Those experiences became some of my fondest childhood memories. By the time I was in upper elementary school, I started helping out at the diner, which only deepened my love for the place. Through middle school, high school, and even college, I continued to help out whenever I had time. Those experiences shaped my cheerful and friendly personality, which became my biggest asset. When it came time to apply for jobs, my personality and experience gave me an edge, and I landed my first choice position at a brokerage firm. I worked in the sales department, and I threw myself into my job with all my energy. My efforts paid off, and I received recognition for my outstanding sales performance. That recognition only motivated me to work harder, and my dedication to my job grew stronger. 3 years passed by in the blink of an eye. My professional life was fulfilling, but my personal life remained stagnant. I started wondering if it was time for a change, and that's when I had an unexpected encounter. While on a sales call, I met a man. After exchanging business cards, I noticed his name, Luke Carter. His bright and confident demeanor matched his name perfectly, I thought. We wrapped up our business discussions smoothly and then decided to chat over coffee. Luke had an easygoing charm and a sharp sense of humor. As we talked, I felt an unexpected flutter of excitement, something I hadn't felt in a long time. When it was time to part ways, I hesitated. I didn't want the conversation to end, but I wasn't sure how to extend it. If it's all right with you, could I get your personal contact information? My heart leapt, but I kept my composure and casually gave him my number. I waited nervously, but he texted sooner than I expected, asking me out for dinner. Our first outing was wonderful, and soon enough we began spending more time together. Before long, we started dating. The more I got to know Luke, the more I was drawn to him. After a year and a half of dating, we decided to get married. When it came time to meet his parents, Luke had a request. I have something to ask you. Could we live with my parents after we're married? I know living on our own would be easier, but they're getting older and I want to be there for them. Luke's parents seemed gentle and kind when I met them during our engagement, so I agreed to the arrangement. Besides, Luke and I both wanted children, and I thought having his parents around would be helpful once we started a family. I quit my job and became a full-time homemaker to focus on our new life together. My parents were incredibly supportive and gave us their heartfelt blessings. Thank you for everything. I'm so grateful for you both. We're so happy for you, Sarah. Be the happiest you can be. With their encouragement, I entered married life with optimism. The beginning of our life together was smooth. Luke's parents were kind and welcoming, and I thought I was stepping into a bright and happy future. But as time went on, things began to change. Slowly, my in-laws' attitude towards me shifted. Their polite requests turned into commands, and their words became laced with criticism. You've been a housewife for a while now, but it doesn't seem like you've learned much about housekeeping. Your mom's right, Sarah. You should start listening to us and take your responsibilities more seriously. Their comments became increasingly direct and hurtful, making me feel like a failure. I still remember the first time they openly criticized me. I stood frozen, unable to move or respond as their words cut through me. Are you just going to stand there like that? You still have plenty to do. Maybe Sarah needs more hands-on training from you, honey. That marked the beginning of a relentless routine where Luke's mom hovered over me, constantly criticizing everything I did. I couldn't believe how drastically their behavior had changed. It felt like I had been thrust into a nightmare. I thought that if I worked harder and earned their approval, things would improve. I threw myself into household tasks, just as I had once dedicated myself to my job. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. I can't believe how slow you are. How did someone like you even end up married to my son? Her words stung deeply. If your mom says so, then it's probably true. Even Luke's dad joined in, and eventually they began criticizing my own parents. What kind of family raises someone this incompetent? I bit my tongue to stop myself from responding, knowing it would only escalate things. But their behavior grew worse, and my mental state deteriorated under the constant strain. They began monitoring my every move, even questioning me when I left the house for groceries. Where do you think you're going? Just to the store for groceries. Groceries? You can barely handle housework, and now you're trying to sneak out? It felt like I was a prisoner, unable to leave the house without their permission. The stress and fear weighed on me heavily, and I began to feel utterly trapped. I thought about confiding in Luke, but his response left me heartbroken. Are you sure this isn't just in your head? My parents are always kind when I'm around. I detailed every insult and mistreatment, but Luke refused to believe me. With no support from him, I felt completely alone. I didn't want to burden my own parents with the truths as they were so happy about my marriage. Despite the emotional toll, I kept everything to myself. I didn't want to worry my parents, especially after they had been so supportive of my marriage. The weight of my circumstances grew heavier, and one day the breaking point came in the form of a phone call from my mom. Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. I didn't want to burden you, but your father has passed away. Her words hit me like a freight train. My father had been my hero, and the thought of never seeing him again was too much to bear. I started crying uncontrollably while still on the phone. My mother explained that my father had been secretly battling an illness for years, hiding it from me to avoid causing worry. Before I could even process the news, my mother-in-law's sharp voice interrupted my grief. Stop crying like that. It's so pathetic. You're making this house feel gloomy. There's no reason to cry that much. Her words shocked me. She knew my father had passed, yet she acted as though my feelings were a nuisance. My father just died. Can't you show even a little compassion? Compassion? Don't be ridiculous. It's not like his death affects us. Yeah, enough with the crying. How about you cook us dinner instead? I was utterly stunned by their complete lack of empathy. Their selfish demands shattered any lingering illusions I had about them. Still holding the phone, I stepped away to speak with my mom in private, only to feel something ice-cold hit me from behind. Turning around, I saw my mother-in-law holding a beer mug, having just thrown the contents, ice water, at me. Maybe this will snap you out of it. Brian laughed uproariously behind her. Why don't you join your dad in the afterlife, Sarah? Something inside me finally broke. I quietly hung up the phone and whispered to myself, Enough. That night, I packed my bags while my in-laws slept. By the time the clock struck 9:30 p.m., I had left the house and was on my way to the train station. I took the fastest train to my hometown, determined to leave the nightmare behind. On the way, I thought about all the horrible things my in-laws had said and done. Their cruelty and indifference solidified my decision never to return. When I arrived at my parents' home, my mother greeted me with tears and open arms. "Oh, Sarah, you've been through so much. I'm so glad you're home." I told her everything about my father's illness, the abuse I endured from my in-laws, and my overwhelming despair. My mom listened patiently and hugged me tightly. The next morning, I received several missed calls from my husband, my in-laws, and even some of their neighbors. I ignored them all, blocking their numbers one by one. My focus was solely on my father's funeral and rebuilding my shattered sense of self. After the funeral, I decided to stay with my mother indefinitely, realizing I could never return to the environment I had escaped. But just 3 days later, my worst fear came true. My in-laws and husband showed up at my parents' house, furious and demanding answers. "How dare you run off like this? Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused us? You've embarrassed us. You're coming back, whether you like it or not." "Sarah, you didn't even tell me about your father's funeral." His accusatory tone infuriated me. "Why would I tell you? You never believed me when I needed your support." Luke sighed deeply, shaking his head in disappointment. "I can't believe you'd abandon my parents like that. They've been nothing but cruel to me. How can you stand there and take their side after everything they've done?" Luke's expression darkened, and for the first time I saw a side of him I never knew existed. "You think you're so innocent? I married you to take care of my parents. That's your job." His words left me speechless. My husband's shocking confession hit me like a thunderbolt. It was clear now. Our marriage was nothing but a calculated arrangement for his convenience. "You're supposed to take care of them. That's why I married you." "That's right. You're our daughter-in-law. Your only job is to follow our orders." "Yeah, enough drama. Get your stuff and let's go." At that moment, my uncle stepped out from the house. A towering figure who had played rugby in his younger years, he was over 6 feet tall and built like a linebacker. The sight of him made all three of them visibly recoil. "What's going on here?" His booming voice echoed through the yard, and I finally felt a sense of safety. "If you're here to cause trouble, I suggest you turn around and leave before things get messy." My in-laws froze, clearly intimidated. "I'm divorcing Luke, and I'm holding both of you accountable for the psychological torment you put me through." "You can't be serious. What proof do you even have?" I calmly took out my phone and played the audio recordings I had secretly collected over the past months. What kind of wife records her in-laws? The kind who needs to protect herself from abuse? The damning evidence left them momentarily speechless, but they quickly recovered, hurling more insults and excuses. "That's enough." His voice silenced them instantly. "Leave now or I'll call the police." My in-laws and husband exchanged nervous glances before storming off, their plan completely derailed. In the following weeks, I filed for divorce and took legal action against my in-laws for emotional distress. The court sided with me, awarding me a substantial settlement, including compensation for the abuse I had endured. Luke tried to fight the divorce, but the recordings proved his complicity, and the judge granted me my freedom. After the legal battles were over, I focused on rebuilding my life. I started working with my mother at the family diner, reviving the cherished memories I had from childhood. Together, we turned it into a thriving business, a place filled with love and laughter. My father's spirit seemed to live on in the diner, guiding me through the challenges and helping me find joy in the little things. Looking back, I realized that my darkest moments had taught me my greatest lessons. I learned to stand up for myself, to value my worth, and to never let anyone diminish my happiness. My life was finally my own, and I was determined to make the most of it. In front of me stood my husband and mother-in-law, both smirking. They were clearly scheming something, and I let out a sigh in my heart. "You're useless now. Just leave this house already." My husband laughed loudly after saying that. "That's right. A worthless person like you should just leave this house." She shoved a divorce agreement right in front of my face. I looked at the document without showing any emotion. "Are you serious about this divorce paper?" "Of course I'm serious. You know I wouldn't joke about something like this." "You better sign it quickly. After all, Michael's new wife will take over where you failed." Hearing their words, I took the divorce papers from them. As I picked up the papers, both of them started laughing loudly, thinking I was shocked by the situation. Watching them laugh, I felt nothing but disgust. My name is Sarah Jones. I married my husband Michael when I was 25 years old. He was only a year older than me, but somewhere along the way, he started treating me like I was beneath him. It wasn't like this at the beginning of our marriage. At first, we decided to save money before having children. After a few years of working hard and saving, we decided to try for a baby. When I turned 30, our daughter Lily was born. Holding her for the first time was a feeling I can't even put into words. Michael even cried as he thanked me, saying, "Thank you for giving me this beautiful angel. Let's cherish her together." For the first year, Michael was actively involved, even taking paternity leave to help care for Lily. However, as Lily approached her first birthday, things began to change. "Keep her quiet, she's too noisy." His tone was harsh, even though Lily was too young to understand or comply with demands. "You don't need to yell like that, she's still a baby." Hearing his shouting only made Lily cry harder. "This is your fault. If you handled her better, she wouldn't cry all the time." With that, he retreated to his study, leaving me alone to comfort our crying daughter. I sighed, wondering where the caring man who once helped with everything had disappeared to. Divorce briefly crossed my mind, but I didn't want Lily to grow up without a father. Michael still provided financial support every month, so I decided to endure for the sake of stability. However, the bigger problem turned out to be his parents. Even before the wedding, they made it clear they didn't think I was good enough for their son. "Why would Michael choose someone like you?" Michael had defended me back then, but their hurtful words left scars. His father was no better, with his outdated belief that men should earn and women should stay at home. "Quit your job and focus on being a proper wife. That's your duty as a woman." I'm sorry, but Michael and I have agreed to both work and share responsibilities. This had caused some tension, but Michael had managed to convince his father to accept the arrangement. When I became pregnant and revealed the baby was a girl, their reactions were anything but celebratory. A girl? The first child must be a boy to carry on the family name. Women don't matter. What's the point of a girl? Stop it. Our baby is precious, no matter the gender. Despite Michael's protests, his parents remained distant and uninterested in Lily after her birth. Over the years, they rarely visited, and even when they did, they didn't acknowledge her as part of the family. My own parents, in contrast, were supportive and loving, always helping with Lily and making me feel appreciated. By the time Lily turned 10, Michael has stopped participating in parenting entirely. I handled everything, work, childcare, and household responsibilities on my own. Exhaustion became my constant companion. One day, I received a call from my mother-in-law. I hesitated to answer, knowing it would likely be more complaints or demands. "Hello, it's been a while. Is something wrong?" "Took you long enough to answer. When I call, you should pick up immediately. That's why you're such a failure." "I'm sorry, I was busy with housework and couldn't get to the phone right away." "Whatever. Anyway, can you come back to a hospital right now? I'm off work today, so I can come. Is something the matter? I'll explain when you get here. Just hurry up, I'm waiting." She hung up abruptly, leaving me no choice but to get ready and head out. The drive to a hospital took 40 minutes, a drive filled with uneasy thoughts. Upon arriving, I checked my phone for her message with a room number, 2055. As I entered the room, my mother-in-law greeted me with her usual scowl. "You're late. What took you so long?" "I'm sorry, but it's a 40-minute drive. I came as quickly as I could." Useless as always. Sighing loudly, she walked into the room where Michael and his father were waiting. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "Your mom called me saying it was important." "Sit down. We have something to discuss." I sat down next to Michael, feeling the tension in the room. "Let's get straight to the point. Starting today, you're moving in with us." What? The shock on Michael's face matched mine. You've never mentioned anything about living together before. Why now? Isn't it obvious? Your father-in-law fell down the stairs yesterday. He's bedridden now. Bedridden? Don't worry, he can still manage daily life with some assistance. So the reason for us moving in is to take care of him? Exactly. You catch on quickly, Michael. I was stunned. My father-in-law, who always said men worked and women handled the home, was now my responsibility. Living with my mother-in-law, who constantly belittled me, seemed unbearable. We both, Michael, and work. How am I supposed to handle a full-time job, housework, childcare, and now caregiving? How could you say that? Don't you feel sorry for my father? Exactly. You're heartless. Of course I feel sorry for him, but this isn't realistic. We'll figure it out. Everyone can pitch in and make it work. You say that now, but you've shown me you can't be relied on. You rarely helped with Lily's upbringing. Oh, shut up. You don't get to talk to me like that. The decision has been made. I was livid, but my protests fell on deaf ears. When I returned home, I broke the news to Lily. Sweetheart, we'll be moving in with your grandparents. I don't want to. They're always mean to you and me. I know, but your father made the decision. Lily reluctantly agreed, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. I felt terrible, but had no choice. We packed our belongings and moved into my in-laws' house, starting a new chapter of misery. Nathan required constant care, and I had to quit my job. Heather, though a housewife, refused to do any housework or caregiving, leaving everything to me. Nathan constantly complained about the food I prepared and intentionally created messes to punish me. Michael and Heather offered no help, while Lily occasionally assisted when she could. Without Lily, I don't know how I would have survived those 7 grueling years. After 7 years of this exhausting routine, I returned from grocery shopping one day to find Michael and his mother smirking in the living room. Their expressions were unmistakable. They were up to something. Took you long enough to get back. You're so slow. No wonder I'm done with you. What are you talking about? You're useless now. Get out of this house. Exactly. A worthless woman like you doesn't belong here. Leave immediately. Michael's mother slammed a completed divorce agreement on the table in front of me. This divorce paper is already signed. Are you serious about this? Of course. You know I don't joke about things like this. Just sign it and leave. We'll have a new wife handle things after you're gone. They both laughed heartily, misinterpreting my lack of response as shock. But I wasn't shocked. I had been expecting this. A few weeks ago, my daughter Lily had alerted me to Michael's affair. Mom, I know this sounds strange, but I think you should divorce Dad. What? Why would you say that? Yesterday I saw Dad with another woman. They were walking arm in arm in the hotel district. Her words confirmed my suspicions. Michael had been coming home late and working weekends. I thanked Lily and decided to investigate further. Using my savings, I hired a private investigator who quickly gathered concrete evidence of the affair. I stored the evidence in my bag to keep it safe from discovery. I also began secretly moving my belongings and Lily's into my parents' home. Today was the culmination of my preparations. I looked at the divorce papers and nodded silently. Then I excused myself, saying I needed a moment alone to process everything. I went to Lily's room where she was waiting. Lily, it's time. Gather what's left of your things. We're leaving now. That was quick. I've already moved most of my stuff, so I'm ready. We shared a smile, then I went to pack the rest of my belongings. Soon, with our bags in hand, we headed to the living room. As you wished, we're leaving. I placed the evidence of Michael's infidelity on the table for both him and his mother to see. What's this? Proof of your affair. Michael grabbed the papers and tore them up in a fit of rage. There, no more evidence. I smiled calmly. That's just a copy. The originals are with my lawyer. Michael's face turned pale and he began shouting accusations at me. You've been scheming behind my back. You're despicable. No, Michael. The despicable one is the father who lets his daughter witness his affair. Dad, I was the one who told Mom about your affair. I saw you with that woman. Michael was stunned into silence. Lily's expression was cold, unlike anything I'd seen before. We'll see you in court. You'll be paying both alimony and child support. Goodbye. With that, Lily and I walked out of the house. On the way to my parents' home, I stopped by City Hall to file the divorce papers. The divorce was finalized quickly. Lily and I spent the next 6 months at my parents' house while she prepared for college entrance exams. My life as a single mother began anew. One quiet afternoon, Lily burst into the living room with hurried footsteps. "Mom!" "Welcome back, Lily. What's going on?" Before Lily could explain, the doorbell rang. I checked the intercom screen and saw Michael standing at the door. "Oh no, he followed you here?" "I tried to avoid him, but he caught me on my way home. He kept asking to see you." Michael's voice crackled through the intercom. "Lily, I know you're in there. Let's talk just for a moment." I monitored for Lily to stay quiet while I pressed the intercom button. "Michael, what do you want?" "Sarah, why are you here?" "This is my home now. State your business." "You ruined my life, Sarah. You need to take responsibility for the mess you left behind." "Responsibility? For what?" Michael launched into a tirade, blaming me for his misfortune. "After you left, my parents turned on me. I married Kate, but she left as soon as she found out about my father's care. I'm drowning in debt from your alimony and child support." "And what does any of that have to do with me?" "Take me back, Sarah. We'll fix everything together." I couldn't help but laugh at his audacity. "Fix everything? You mean go back to being your maid and caregiver?" "No, thank you." Michael's voice grew desperate. "Then give me the money back." "That money is for our daughter. It's not coming back to you." His tone shifted to a quieter, pleading one. "At least let me see Lily. She's my daughter too." I looked at Lily, who shook her head with determination. "Lily doesn't want to see you, Michael. You need to respect her decision." Michael's voice broke into a pathetic whimper. "Please, Sarah, I have no one left." I closed the intercom without another word. Michael eventually left, defeated. Over the following months, life for Lily and me continued to improve. Lily graduated high school and was accepted into her first choice university. She was thrilled to move into her own apartment for college, and I supported her every step of the way. On the day she moved out, we shared a heartfelt goodbye. "Mom, thank you for everything. I'll visit often, so don't be lonely." "I'm so proud of you, Lily. Go out there and live your best life." Watching her drive off filled me with a mix of sadness and pride. I returned to my quiet home, ready to focus on my work and my own happiness. Michael's life, meanwhile, took a harsher turn. His parents' health deteriorated further, and he became their sole caregiver. With mounting debts and no one to rely on, he was stuck in a cycle of misery. The man who once believed he could control everything was now at the mercy of his own choices. As for me, I found peace in my independence and joy in watching Lily thrive. Our new life was far from what I had envisioned, but it was one I wouldn't trade for anything.
In-laws crash our honeymoon and stay 3 weeks. Mill says, "Shall we just move in?" Me, "Great idea, I'll move out." In-laws, "What?"
I had dedicated my entire life to my work and had no opportunity for romance. Then, a younger handsome man approached me and we decided to get married. It felt like one of those idealized scenarios you often see in online advertisements. I was elated, but deep down, I knew life wasn't that simple or ideal. The man I married had only his looks going for him. I ended up paying 100% of the wedding and honeymoon expenses. While I had enough money, it felt hollow to see no effort or sincerity from him. But that wasn't the end of it. His parents joined us on our honeymoon, acting like it was a natural thing to do. If they had paid for their own expenses, I might have been able to enjoy it. However, they clearly expected me to foot the bill, and I was left utterly speechless. I had never encountered such audacity in my life. Soon after, his parents began frequenting our new home without prior notice. I found them staying overnight, making themselves completely at home. Weeks passed, and they showed no signs of leaving. I was at my wit's end and thought, surely this level of impoliteness is beyond acceptable. This new house is so lovely. Why don't we just live here together? You wouldn't mind, would you? It became clear they had no intention of leaving. They were intent on leeching off us. I smiled sweetly and said, "That's fine. I'll be moving out instead." "What?" "If you want to live with your son, be my guest. Travel wherever you'd like. But I am not your sponsor." Supporting my husband alone might have been tolerable, even if he didn't love me. I was willing to let him live off me out of gratitude for choosing to marry me. But I drew the line at supporting his parents as well. Ignoring their shocked expressions, I began packing my things into my largest suitcase. My name is Laura James. I'm a 35-year-old employee at a major beauty company. My parents retired and moved to the countryside, leaving me to live alone comfortably. People often assume that working at a beauty company, I must be a well-groomed and attractive woman. Some even think I must be the envy of other women or popular with men. But that's far from the truth. At least, for me, those assumptions couldn't be more wrong. I've been in the industry for over 10 years, and I've never been popular or lucky in love. My looks aren't particularly bad, nor are they extraordinary. I'm just an ordinary esthetician with no dating history. My relationship history aligns perfectly with my career history. Non-existent. Working in a female-dominated environment, I had very few opportunities to meet men. Early on, I was invited to mixers and group dates, but once I turned 30, those invitations stopped abruptly. Even when I did attend, I was nothing more than a background character to my younger, prettier colleagues. It wasn't devastating, but it did make me realize how others saw me, an older woman past her prime. I channeled my energy into work instead, finding solace and pride in my career. Hearing from clients that their bridal skincare treatments made them feel beautiful or helped them heal after a breakup gave me a sense of fulfillment. Women's resilience and power always amazed me, and I felt honored to play a role in their journeys. Over the years, I learned to take care of myself, both physically and emotionally. Working in a beauty-focused industry meant I couldn't afford to neglect my appearance. Time spent taking care of my skin or health became an essential part of maintaining balance in my life. I realized that even if you aren't naturally beautiful, treating yourself with care and respect allows others to value you as well. Yet despite my efforts, love never seemed to find me. My irregular work hours made it difficult to make plans or meet new people. Consecutive days off were rare, and I didn't have the energy to go out drinking after work. Younger colleagues often dated, got married, and left the company. I once overheard someone say, "I'd hate to end up like Laura, stuck at work forever and turning into a spinster." It hurt to hear, but I couldn't argue. I was indeed single and past the age where people expected me to find a partner. I stayed silent, not wanting to give anyone the satisfaction of knowing how their words stung. From then on, my desire for romance dwindled. Determined to live a stable life on my own, I threw myself into work. I saved diligently, and even volunteered to work extra shifts when younger colleagues requested time off for dates. My dedication earned me promotions and salary increases, and my savings steadily grew. When people asked why I worked so hard, I'd say it was for my future, specifically my old age. Dwelling on that thought too much was depressing, so I trained myself not to think too deeply about it. Then one day, a bubbly new hire named Miley joined our team. Miley, in her early 20s, was bright and full of energy. She started inviting me out for drinks after shifts, and despite the age gap, I found her company refreshing. I always paid for our outings, but I didn't mind. It felt nice to have someone genuinely interested in spending time with me. "Laura, what are your hobbies?" "I don't really have any. Work is all I do." "Oh, that's so cool. But hobbies can be a great way to recharge. Are you feeling recharged?" Hearing positive feedback from clients lift my spirits, but the workplace can be draining. Our female-dominated workplace was rife with gossip, bullying, and exclusion. As assistant manager, I often found myself mediating disputes and handling complaints. It was exhausting, but as long as I could pay the bills, I could tolerate it. Was it fulfilling? No, work wasn't my hobby. You should find something you truly enjoy, Laura. You look so tired lately. Miley's kindness stood out in our toxic workplace. She was my only ally. When others teased me about being unpopular, Miley was the first to defend me. I cherished the time I spent with her, knowing it might not last forever. Through Miley, I even joined a group outing and met a younger man named Henry. I'm Henry. Would you like to have dinner with me? I was shocked. No man had ever asked me out directly, not even out of politeness. Unsure if his offer was genuine, I confided in Miley. That's great, Laura. Just go for it and tell me how it goes. Encouraged by Miley, I went on my first date in over a decade. When I arrived at the meeting place, Henry greeted me with a warm smile that made his eyes crinkle. That smile alone could make anyone fall for him. You don't have to be that normal. Just Henry is fine. Oh, calling you by your first name feels a little embarrassing. How about I just call you Hi? I'd prefer Henry if you're okay with that. It makes me happier. His cheerfulness was infectious, and I found myself relaxing in his presence. Despite being younger, Henry had a way of making me feel at ease. I suggested we drop formalities, and he looked genuinely delighted, which I found endearing. Something about him evoked a maternal, almost protective affection in me. Looking back, I think that affection clouded my judgment. Henry was incredibly charming, always knowing the right things to say. I noticed how considerate you were at the group outing. It was clear you cared about everyone's comfort. I really admired that. His words hit all the right notes, making me feel truly seen for the first time in ages. Before I knew it, I had fallen for him. The thought of losing someone so kind and attentive filled me with dread. My determination to stay independent wavered, and I realized how deeply I yearned for companionship. Shortly after we started dating, Henry brought up the topic of marriage. My parents were overjoyed. They had all but given up on the idea of me getting married. When I met Henry's parents, they seemed warm and welcoming, but I couldn't shake a subtle sense of unease. His mother's questions about my job and finances lingered in my mind. Were they worried about my ability to quit work and become a housewife? Or were they more interested in my income? Either way, I brushed off my doubts, blinded by my love for Henry. I was determined to make this relationship work. After all, marriage was a lifelong commitment, and Henry had chosen me. But cracks began to show before our honeymoon was even over. His parents' selfish behavior and his inability to set boundaries became glaringly apparent. I came to the heartbreaking realization that Henry had married me for financial security, not love. Though devastated, I knew I couldn't continue living like this. I packed my things and walked away from the life I had worked so hard to build. Starting over was terrifying, but it also felt like a new beginning. I promised myself I would prioritize my own happiness and live authentically from now on. I don't need a partner to validate my worth. I'll create a fulfilling life on my own terms. After leaving, I decided to focus on rebuilding my life. I signed a lease for a small apartment, one that felt cozy and entirely mine. At work, I threw myself into my responsibilities, finding solace in the routine. My coworkers, however, were not entirely oblivious to my situation. Hey, Laura, did I hear something about you moving out already? Wow, quick, isn't it? The smirks and whispers followed me, and I realized they must have pieced together that my marriage had unraveled. So, is it true? Did you end up being one of those airport divorce cases? I wanted to lash out, but I knew that would only fuel their gossip. Instead, I remained silent and carried on. My thoughts often wandered back to Miley. Was she part of this web of gossip? Could she have been the source? I remembered her as the person who had supported me, cheered me on, and encouraged my relationship with Henry. Yet the office rumors seemed too specific to ignore. I confronted her one evening as gently as I could. "Miley, I've been hearing things at work, and it feels like my personal life is on display. Do you know anything about this?" "Oh, Laura, don't worry about them. People always talk, you know. It doesn't mean anything." Her response was evasive, and for the first time I doubted her sincerity. Days later, I overheard her talking to another coworker. "Yeah, Henry was never serious about her. I mean, he told me he was just in it for the money. Can you believe she didn't see it coming?" My heart sank. The person I had trusted most had betrayed me. Worse, she seemed to take pleasure in my misfortune. I confronted her directly this time, unable to hold back my anger. "Miley, how could you? I thought we were friends." "Friends? Oh, Laura, don't be naive. Watching you get played was just too entertaining." Her words stung like knives, cutting deeper than Henry's betrayal ever could. I walked away, determined to never let her, or anyone like her, affect me again. From that day forward, I focused on myself. I spent weekends exploring hobbies I'd long neglected, from painting to yoga. Slowly, the pain began to fade, replaced by a sense of empowerment. I realized that my worth wasn't tied to a partner, a job title, or the approval of others. It lay in how I treated myself, in the life I chose to create. Months passed, and a new manager took over at work. The toxic environment began to shift, becoming more supportive and collaborative. I was promoted, finally recognized for my years of hard work and dedication. With the promotion came an opportunity to transfer to another branch, far away from the ghosts of my past. I took it, excited for a fresh start in a vibrant new city. As I packed my belongings, I felt a bittersweet mix of emotions. Sadness for what I'd lost, but hope for what lay ahead. Standing in my empty apartment, I made a promise to myself. To live authentically, to embrace my flaws and strengths, and to never again settle for less than I deserve. This was my life, and I was finally ready to live it on my own terms. My new apartment was in a lively neighborhood, full of energy and possibilities. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of unpacking, getting to know the area, and settling into my new role at work. The team here was refreshingly different, warm, inclusive, and genuinely supportive. "Laura, welcome to the team. We're thrilled to have someone with your expertise." For the first time in years, I felt appreciated for my skills rather than judged for my age or appearance. Slowly but surely, I began to find joy in the little things. Morning walks through the park, trying new coffee shops, and decorating my new space. I even joined a local book club, something I'd always been curious about but never had the time or courage to try. Meeting new people was daunting at first, but the club's members were welcoming and passionate. "So, Laura, what drew you to this group? Are you a big reader?" I've always loved books, but this is my first time being part of a club. I thought it might be a good way to connect with others. The club quickly became a highlight of my week, a space where I could share thoughts, laugh, and simply be myself. As time went on, I also took a closer look at my finances. I'd always been careful with money, and despite the setbacks with Henry and his parents, I was still in a good place financially. I decided to invest in a course on personal development, something to help me grow and rediscover my passions. The course covered everything from mindfulness and self-compassion, to setting boundaries and embracing change. It wasn't always easy, but each step brought me closer to understanding who I was and what I wanted out of life. One day, while walking home from a workshop, I passed by a cozy little cafe with a help wanted sign in the window. On a whim, I decided to apply, not because I needed the money, but because I wanted to experience something new. "You're hired, Laura. We could use someone with your cheerful energy. Welcome aboard." Working part-time at the cafe was a delightful change of pace. I met people from all walks of life, and every interaction reminded me of the kindness and resilience that existed in the world. One afternoon, an elderly regular named Mr. Williams struck up a conversation with me. "You know, Laura, you got a spark about you. What's your story?" "It's a long one, but let's just say I'm learning to write a new chapter." He smiled knowingly, as if he understood exactly what I meant. Moments like these reinforced my belief that life could be rich and fulfilling, even without the traditional milestones of marriage or family. I stopped defining myself by what I didn't have and started appreciating what I did. A comfortable home, a meaningful career, and a circle of supportive friends and colleagues. And most importantly, a newfound love and respect for myself. Looking back, I realized that every setback, every heartbreak and betrayal has shaped me into the person I was today. A person who was strong, independent, and ready to embrace whatever came next. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And that, I decided, was more than enough.
Mill takes over my triplets special day. This is for family only. Furious, I cut off all support to Mill forever.
"Oh, you're finally here. Thanks for dropping them off." For the triplets milestone celebration, my mother-in-law went ahead and booked a fancy restaurant without even consulting me. But when I arrived, she immediately grabbed the triplets from the stroller, smiling broadly. "Come here, sweethearts. Today, Grandma and Daddy are going to celebrate with you." Daniel picked up our younger son and daughter, and together with Evelyn, my mother-in-law, they headed into the restaurant, leaving me behind. From here on, it's just for the family. Evelyn turned around with a beaming smile. I couldn't make sense of the situation, let alone say anything. Daniel stood silently behind her, his head hanging low. "Oh, don't worry. The bill will be sent to you later." And then the door slammed shut, leaving me alone outside. I would never forgive them for this. With trembling fingers, I called my mother, Emily. "Hello? What's wrong, Lisa?" "I'm sorry, but can I come home right now?" I had been holding back, but the moment I opened my mouth, tears poured out. "Did something happen? Are you okay?" Hearing her warm voice, I decided to tell her everything. "Actually," after listening to my story, my mom firmly said, "Come back right now. Your father and I will be waiting for you." I was truly grateful to have parents like them. Hearing her words, I finally felt calm again. Just as I was about to call a cab, Evelyn emerged from the restaurant. She was holding my eldest son. Behind her, Daniel followed, carrying our younger son and daughter. "Your parenting must be awful, Lisa. They won't stop crying." "Oh, and the celebration's over, so you can go home now." With that, they shoved the triplets back at me. And then they went back into the restaurant as if nothing had happened. Even though this gathering was arranged to celebrate the triplets, apparently Evelyn and Daniel were simply looking to enjoy a quiet meal together. "You're such a useless wife. As long as I have Daniel by my side, he's all I really need. So you can go on ahead home." Evelyn's gaze was icy, and Daniel seemed completely under her control. I didn't want to be there any longer, for obvious reasons. So, I took the triplets and got into a taxi. The triplets stopped crying as soon as they were in my arms. I vowed never to let Evelyn or Daniel near my children again. When we arrived at my parents' house, my mom hugged the triplets and welcomed us inside. "Lisa, are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm okay. Sorry for the trouble." "It's okay. Don't worry about it." My mom spoke to me gently and encouraged me. My family now consisted of just my parents and my babies. On my way to my parents' place, I decided that I had to divorce Daniel as soon as possible. I was finally at home where I actually felt welcomed, and promised myself that I wouldn't go back to the house that I once shared with Daniel. I had endured so much, but what happened today was the final straw. I also decided to stop providing financial support to Evelyn. Daniel and I had been financially supporting Evelyn, who lived alone. But to be precise, all that support came from my income. As a freelance worker, most people might assume my income was unstable. In fact, Evelyn seemed to believe I wasn't earning much at all. But in reality, I was making twice as much as Daniel. With over a decade of experience as an editor, I had built a steady roster of clients. Of course, I was busy, but compared to my days at a publishing house, this was much more manageable. It was a workload I could handle while managing household chores. Daniel, on the other hand, earned relatively little for a systems engineer. He was supportive with parenting and a good father in that sense, but his salary had been steadily declining. It was only because of my earnings that we were able to send money to Evelyn. But Evelyn believed the financial support was coming from Daniel. "Daniel is such a good son. He sends me $1,000 every month." But as for Lisa, Evelyn never made an effort to understand my career or the hard work I put in. Every time we handed her money, she had complaints. But she accepted the money as if it were her right and never expressed any gratitude. I wanted to tell her the truth, that the money was coming from me, but I knew she wouldn't believe it. So I kept quiet all this time. Meanwhile, Daniel acted as though the money was solely coming from his income. I just wanted to make life easier for Mom. He probably has some pride as a son that he wanted to uphold. I couldn't live with Daniel any longer. I had tried to hold on for the triplets' sake, but I finally told my mother that I was going to divorce him. I don't want to give them another penny. "Lisa, you've endured so much. Just leave him as soon as you can. You can stay here with us." "Thank you." The next day, I started preparing for the divorce with my mom's support. That's when Daniel started calling me. I assumed he was worried about me not returning and wanted to talk. I didn't feel like answering, so I ignored his calls. But Daniel didn't give up. Soon, there were dozens of missed calls on my phone. Even so, I couldn't bring myself to answer. Is it Daniel?" "Yeah, but I just can't deal with him right now." "Don't force yourself. If you ignore him long enough, he'll give up." "You're right. Thanks." I decided to forget about Daniel and focus entirely on taking care of the triplets. The next day, the doorbell at my parents' house rang. I was feeding the triplets, so my mom went to answer the door. But as soon as she checked the monitor, her expression froze. Lisa, what's wrong?" "It looks like Daniel is here." What? I looked at the monitor in surprise and saw Daniel, looking completely exhausted. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his usually neat beard was unkempt. Lisa, please hear me out. I didn't even want to hear his voice, so I immediately told him to leave. I don't want to see you anymore. Stop coming to my parents' house. Please, don't say that. I'm begging you. Daniel lowered his head as he pleaded. No matter how coldly I dismissed him, he refused to leave. I used to love him, but now I could hardly stand seeing his face. Still, I thought this might be the only opportunity to give him a piece of my mind. Although I was reluctant, I opened the door and faced Daniel. Why are you here now? As I said this, Daniel desperately struggled to find the words. Lisa, I'm so sorry. Please, come back. He was trembling as he begged me. It was clear he hadn't expected me to leave with the triplets and go straight to my parents' house. I don't know what to do now that you're gone. I was wrong. I kept siding with my mom and hurt you. Daniel's eyes welled up with tears as he apologized. But his words didn't reach me. I told you over and over again, didn't I? Why do you always take your mother's side? You knew I was already planning the triplets celebration, didn't you? As I pressed him, Daniel shrank back. I didn't think that it would be such a big deal. I thought you'd just go along with whatever my mom wanted, even if you didn't like it. Of course not. Do you even realize how much you hurt me? I'm truly sorry. I'll never hurt you again. Please, come back. As Daniel pleaded desperately, the sound of the triplets crying came from inside the house. My mom was trying to comfort them, but they still felt unsettled without me. Hearing their cries, Daniel's face grew even more pained. But even seeing that, my feelings didn't change. I remained calm and detached. It's too late for gratitude now. You weren't there for me when I needed you most. I don't even need your apologies anymore. When I said this, Daniel froze, unable to respond. Sweat was forming on his forehead, and his lips trembled. But even seeing that, my resolve didn't waver. I'm not sending your mom any more money. I thought I was doing the right thing. But if this is the result, I should never have done it at all. Please, don't say that. Daniel's face stiffened at my words. With his income alone, he wouldn't be able to support his mother. Your mom still thinks she's getting the money from you, doesn't she? She's relying on your income, so you'll just have to figure it out from now on. Daniel's face twisted in despair as I said that. Why don't you just tell her the truth? That all the money you've been sending came from me. What? No, I can't. Overwhelmed by guilt and shame, Daniel turned red and struggled to respond. You might have your pride, but the truth will come out eventually. Hearing this, Daniel slumped his shoulders and avoided my gaze. I pulled out the divorce papers I had prepared and handed them to him. Daniel's eyes widened in shock. Lisa, what is this? Sign this right now. I can't live with you anymore. Don't say that. The kids are still so young. You might have helped with parenting, but you couldn't even stand up for your own wife. I can't trust you with the kids. Please, sign the papers. As I said this, Daniel turned pale and signed the divorce papers with trembling hands. After that, he trudged away in defeat. His back looked smaller than ever. The next day, the divorce was finalized. With my freedom regained, I turned my focus to raising the triplets and starting a new life. However, the day after the divorce, someone pounded loudly on my parents' front door. The noise startled the triplets, and they all started crying at once. My mom went to answer the door, but came back looking pale. Lisa, it's Daniel's mom. What? Shocked, I headed to the door, only to hear Evelyn shouting furiously. Lisa, how could you abandon Daniel? Taking my son and grandchildren away is unforgivable. Evelyn was trembling with rage, hurling accusations at me without mercy. This all happened because you failed in your duties as a wife. Wait a minute. Do you even know how much I've endured while living with Daniel? As a matter of fact, I was the one supporting both you and Daniel. Evelyn was silent for a moment, but then raised her voice to argue. Oh, don't act like you supported us when you were living off Daniel's income. That's not true. I was the one earning most of the money. Even the money sent to you every month came from my paycheck. Evelyn's eyes widened, and she opened and closed her mouth, stunned. That can't be. I thought it was all from Daniel. No, it was all from me. But that ends now. You'll have to rely on Daniel from now on. I'm not getting involved anymore. Evelyn sank to her knees, looking utterly defeated. I didn't know. I'm sorry. Her apology came far too late and felt hollow. Your apology means nothing. We're strangers now. With that, I firmly told Evelyn to leave. If you don't leave, I'll have no choice but to call the police. Evelyn quickly got up and staggered out of the house. I could faintly hear her muttering, Why did it come to this? But I felt nothing. Afterward, the child support payments from Daniel started coming in. With his income, most of his money would now go toward living expenses and child support. It seemed the payments to Evelyn had completely stopped. Without the financial support she had relied on, her life grew much harder. With her spending habits, Evelyn reportedly started working part-time at a supermarket. I once caught a glimpse of her at work, being scolded by a younger manager. Daniel, too, seemed to be struggling. Unable to afford rent, he moved back in with Evelyn. Meanwhile, I continued living at my parents' house with the triplets. With my mom's help with childcare and chores, I was able to work more easily than before. The triplets were growing steadily, smiling at me and my mom every day. These children gave me the strength to keep going. I would never let anyone take them from me again. I swore to myself that I would never let them suffer. Every day is hard, but I would do everything I could as their mother. I held the triplets tightly and resolved to move forward.
Son missing in-laws said, Live with rats. MIL scrap container had $30,000 and a note. Meet at midnight.
You're going to live in the storage room from now on with the mice. Leave Brian to us. As those words reached my ears, I felt all strength leave my body. It was clear they were hiding Brian somewhere. Fear and despair consumed me. I had to escape and get Brian back no matter what. But trapped as I was, that seemed impossible. About a week had passed since this nightmare began. One day, the food container my mother-in-law threw into the room was different. Inside, I found something shocking, a stack of cash. It looked like around $30,000. Among the money was a small slip of paper. It said, Tonight at midnight, meet me at the nearest station entrance. The short message made my heart pound wildly. It was clear this was my mother-in-law's doing. but I couldn't tell if this was a lifeline or another trap. Still, I couldn't stay locked up forever. Even if it was a trap, I had to take the chance. My name is Sarah James. I'm 29 years old. In my short 30 years of life, I've faced many trials. My life began to spiral out of control when I was 12. That winter, I lost both of my beloved parents in a car accident. My carefree days came to an abrupt end. I was forced to move from one relative's house to another. Even as a child, I could feel how much of a burden I was to them. They offered kind words on the surface, but there was always an unbridgeable distance. At some homes, I was made to help with housework. It became difficult to keep up with school. My time with friends dwindled and loneliness began to consume me. School became my only refuge. In particular, a classmate named Henry was a great comfort to me. He was always cheerful and extended small acts of kindness to me. His warmth reminded me of what I had lost at home. I secretly found solace in his presence. However, when we entered high school, our paths diverged. Henry enrolled in the best high school in the area, known for its academic rigor. Meanwhile, I continued to live with my relatives, working part-time jobs to cover my expenses. I worked harder than anyone else in school, but university was out of the question. My part-time earnings simply couldn't cover the cost of tuition. The frustration of giving up on my dreams weighed heavily on me. After graduating, I started working as a temp employee. A few years passed since high school, and then fate intervened. At a local reunion, I met Henry again. He greeted me with the same warm smile he'd always had. In that moment, it felt like the loneliness of my past was lifted, if only for a moment. That reunion marked a turning point in my life. We were drawn to each other and soon began dating. At 25, we got married. I became a housewife, dedicating myself to supporting our home and family. Marrying Henry brought me happiness I had never known before. For the first time, I felt truly content. But little did I know this decision would bring new upheavals into my life. Shortly after our marriage, we moved in with Henry's parents. He had always intended to inherit the family home, so it wasn't a surprise. However, living with his parents was far more suffocating than I had anticipated. The source of the tension was my father-in-law, Mike. "Sarah, this is why I have trouble with today's young women. If you can't fulfill your role in the household, then you're no good." His criticisms came daily, relentless and cutting. Mike worked as an executive at a major corporation and never hesitated to flaunt his status. He believed his opinions were absolute. Every morning at breakfast, he would read the newspaper and quiz me about the day's news. But it was never about enjoying conversation. It was just an excuse to find fault with my answers and belittle me. Being a housewife must be easy, right? At the very least, you should be able to manage the household perfectly for the sake of your husband. His words were always harsh and demeaning. At first, I tried to respond with a smile, but over time, I found myself unable to say anything at all. My mother-in-law, Terry, had been a housewife for decades. She was completely submissive to Mike's beliefs. "Sarah, your role is to protect the household. That's your duty." Hearing her words, I felt a wave of disappointment. I secretly hoped she might take my side. But instead, her attitude made me feel betrayed. The only person who seemed to notice my struggle was Henry. "Dad, stop it. Sarah is doing her best in an unfamiliar environment. Give her some slack." Every time he defended me, I felt a little bit of relief, but Mike ignored him completely. "Don't be foolish. If a man is soft on a woman, it will ruin the household. Henry, you need to teach her discipline." These arguments happened again and again, wearing me down emotionally. Mike, being an executive, was home more often than a typical working man. That meant I bore the brunt of his words and pressure while Henry was at work. If breakfast was even a few minutes late, Mike would pursue his lips in irritation. "Sarah, if you can't even manage time, how can you expect to manage anything else? If this were a company, you'd be fired immediately." I finally snapped one morning and retorted, "This isn't a company, and I wasn't feeling well this morning." His face darkened, his expression becoming even harsher. "Are you arguing with me, the head of this family? Do you think this kind of attitude will keep a household running? Know your place." His raised voice made me feel like the walls were closing in. I knew I had no choice but to endure it until Henry came home, but the weight in my chest grew heavier with each passing day. "Sarah, are you okay? Do you think you'll be able to manage here?" He asked me gently one night. I nodded silently, unable to bring myself to say the words in my heart. Our cohabitation had just begun, and the thought of what lay ahead filled me with anxiety. A year after our marriage, our son Brian was born. His birth brought indescribable joy, a light in the darkness. But Brian's arrival also made Mike's behavior even harder to endure. To him, Brian was nothing more than the next heir of the James family. His expectations loomed over every aspect of my parenting. Sarah, you're coddling Brian too much. Boys need to be raised strictly. How many times must I tell you? His commanding voice made me shrink back every time he called my name. By the time Brian turned 3, Mike began taking him out on excursions without consulting Henry or me. He would simply announce he was educating Brian and leave the house with him. One day I confronted him. Mike, at least tell us where you're taking him. Brian is only 3 years old. Where did you go today? He gave me a cold, dismissive look. I don't need to report to you. A mother who spoils her son constantly has no right to question me. When Mike returned with Brian, the boy was often covered in mud or wearing unfamiliar branded clothes. Sometimes he even came back repeating words I had never taught him. One day, despite Brian feeling unwell, Mike insisted on taking him out. He returned with a feverish Brian who was visibly unwell. Sarah, I told you Brian wasn't feeling well. Why would you take him out anyway? My voice trembled with anger. If he gets sick from something like this, it just shows how weak he is. It's your fault for raising him so poorly, Sarah. I was speechless. As Brian coughed beside me, Mike merely muttered that he lacked grit. When Henry came home and saw Brian's condition, he immediately confronted Mike. Dad, this has to stop. Brian is only 3 years old. Stop taking him out without telling us. How dare you talk back to me, Henry? Since when did you become so high and mighty? As the two of them argued, Brian clung to me with a frightened expression. Not wanting him to witness more of this chaos, I stepped between them. Please stop. Brian is right here. Let's not argue in front of him. That night, the house was quiet, but I knew Mike's attitude wouldn't change. I decided to avoid further confrontations for Brian's sake. If enduring this could protect our family's peace, I would bear it. But as I kept swallowing my emotions, I felt pieces of myself being chipped away. I couldn't help but wonder how long this life would last. Then in the winter of our 4th year of marriage, tragedy struck. Henry was killed in a car accident. When I received the news, it felt as if time itself had stopped. Henry? Gone? It had to be a mistake. This couldn't be real. While I stood there in shock, Mike's voice rang out cold and stern. There's no time for tears. We need to start preparing for the funeral immediately. It must be dignified and worthy of the James name. Too drained to argue, I simply followed Mike and Terry's instructions. I moved through the motions of the funeral preparations like a puppet. The funeral itself passed in a blur faster than I could comprehend what was happening. The only thing tethering me to reality was the warmth of little Brian in my arms. My heart felt hollow. Time seemed to move without meaning. A few days after the funeral, I woke up one morning to realize something was terribly wrong. Brian wasn't in his room. Mike had insisted we sleep in separate rooms, so every morning I would go check on Brian. But that morning his bed was empty. Brian, where are you? I searched the house frantically. Every room, every corner. He was nowhere to be found. Panicked, I ran to Mike. Mike, Brian isn't in his room. Where did you take him? I don't know where he is. Stop accusing me of nonsense. His indifferent tone sent chills down my spine. Desperate, I turned to Terry in the kitchen. Terry, have you seen Brian? I haven't. Maybe he's just hiding somewhere. Her evasive response only deepened my fear. I ran out of the house and searched the neighborhood. The park, the riverbank, every place he loved. But no matter where I looked, he wasn't there. Returning to the house, I was on the verge of calling the police. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. Suddenly, Mike grabbed my wrist. What do you think you're doing? I need to call the police. Brian is missing. He's only 3 years old. What if something happened to him? That's not your decision to make. Your role here is over. His words struck like a hammer. Before I could react, Mike's grip tightened, and Terry swiftly took my phone from my hand. Give it back! I need to call the police! My voice cracked with desperation. You have no right to do anything anymore. Before I could process his words, Mike shoved me into the storage room. Terry slammed the door shut, the sound echoing ominously. Open the door! Let me out! I banged on the door, shouting, but the sturdy storage room didn't budge. You'll live in there from now on with the mice. Leave Brian to us. Those words drained me of all hope. It was clear they had taken Brian and hidden him somewhere. Fear and despair gripped me completely. I had to escape and get Brian back. But locked in the storage room, I couldn't see a way out. Days turned into what felt like weeks as I sat confined in the storage room. The only thing inside was a small, portable toilet and a dusty old clock hanging on the wall. That clock became my only way of keeping track of time. Terry would bring me meals in plastic containers once a day, but they were hardly meals, scraps really. "This is plenty for you. You should be grateful you're getting anything at all." Her voice was cold, devoid of any sympathy. At first I tried to question her. "Where is Brian? Is he safe?" But she ignored me entirely. It became clear she had no intention of answering. My only thoughts were of Brian. Was he okay? Was he scared? The uncertainty gnawed at me constantly. I knew I had to endure it if I wanted to see him again. Then about a week after my confinement began, something unusual happened. Terry threw a food container into the storage room as usual, but this time it felt heavier than normal. I quickly opened it and froze. Inside was a stack of cash, an enormous sum. By my estimation, it was around $30,000. Nestled among the bills was a small slip of paper. The note read, "Tonight at midnight, meet me at the nearest station entrance." My heart pounded as I read the words. It was obviously from Terry, but I couldn't tell if this was a lifeline or a trap. Either way, I knew I couldn't stay locked up forever. Even if it was a trap, I had to take the chance. That night, as the clock struck midnight, I cautiously pushed open the storage room door. To my surprise, it wasn't locked. The house was silent. Holding the container tightly, I stepped outside. The cool night air stung my face. Is it really safe to leave? Doubts swirled in my mind, but I couldn't stop now. I ran as fast as I could through the empty streets. When I reached the station, Terry was waiting near the entrance. She was dressed more plainly than usual and her face was expressionless, but I noticed a hint of nervousness in her eyes. "You're here." She handed me a ticket and pulled me through the turnstile. I was too stunned to resist as she pushed me onto the train. In my hands, she pressed a paper bag. "Go to the address written in the snow. Wait there until I come for you." I looked at her, bewildered. "Terry, what's going on? Where's Brian?" She raised her hand, cutting me off. "If you want to protect Brian, do exactly as I say." Her quiet, firm tone silenced me. The train doors closed and the car began to move. Through the window, I saw her figure growing smaller and smaller on the platform. Left alone in the train, I opened the paper bag. Inside were a simple set of clothes and a slip of paper with an address on it. There was no further explanation. "Please, Brian, be safe." My whispered prayer dissolved into the quiet of the train car. My heart was a storm of fear and hope, crashing together in waves. I stared at my reflection in the window, tears streaming down my face. I didn't understand Terry's motives or what would happen next, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like something was changing. The rhythmic motion of train began to calm my nerves, though only slightly. I kept my eyes on the passing darkness outside the window. The address on the slip of paper led me to a small rundown apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. The building looked old, but it was surprisingly well maintained. I clutched the paper bag tightly as I approached the unit Terry had specified. Using the key inside the bag, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was simple and sparsely furnished, but meticulously clean. A single table and chair sat in the center of the room, and the basic necessities, bed, refrigerator, and stove, were neatly arranged. Checking the fridge, I found it fully stocked with food. Despite Terry's past coldness, the room felt carefully prepared. On the table was a sealed envelope addressed to me. "Sarah," it read in Terry's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened the letter. The contents of the letter left me breathless. In her neat, precise handwriting, Terry had poured out a truth that shook me to my core. "What I am about to share is a secret I have carried for years. Please read this through to the end. It is time you know everything." Terry began by confessing the truth about Henry's birth. Mike, it turned out, had kept a mistress for many years. Her name was Amy Hunter, and she had once worked as a receptionist at Mike's company. When Terry was unable to conceive, Mike decided to have a child with his mistress. Henry was born from that relationship. Mike and I took him in as our own to protect the family's reputation. Terry admitted that Henry had never known the truth. He grew up believing we were his biological parents, and I have often wondered if that was the right choice. She described years of suffering, forced to raise the child of her husband's affair while enduring Mike's control. My family depended on Mike's financial support. If I left him, my parents and siblings would have been destitute. I had no choice but to endure his betrayals and humiliation. Terry's pain seeped through every word. She went on to reveal that Brian was currently with Amy. Amy always wanted to raise Brian as her own, seeing him as the next heir to the James name. Mike allowed it, indulging her whims despite knowing it was wrong. Terry admitted that Amy had been a frequent presence. She had visited often, under the pretense of bonding with Brian. I have always regretted not standing up to Mike. I regret allowing this family's legacy to destroy so many lives. But I want to make things right. Terry ended the letter with a plea for me to trust her. The money I gave you is all I have. Use it as you see fit. But please stay hidden until I can come to you. When I finished reading, I set the letter down and stared at the ceiling, overwhelmed. The secrets of the James family, the lies Henry had never known, and Terry's long-buried pain pressed heavily on my chest. I couldn't process it all at once, but one thing was clear. I had to protect Brian. I folded the letter carefully and wiped away my tears. I needed to plan my next steps carefully if I wanted to rescue my son. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the apartment buzzer. My heart raced as I approached the door. When I opened it, Terry was standing there. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I truly don't know how to apologize for everything I've done. She knelt on the ground, bowing deeply, tears streaming down her face. For the first time, the icy, stoic Terry I had always known was gone. Mike's control over me, it's no excuse. I failed to protect you. But I promise you, no matter what it takes, we will get Brian back. I stared at her, uncertain of what to say. Before reading her letter, I would never have forgiven her. But now, knowing her truth, I could see the deep pain she carried. I knelt beside her and placed my hand on her shoulder. It's okay, Terry. I don't hate you. Let's focus on rescuing Brian together. She looked up at me, her face a mix of relief and determination. Terry explained that Mike still believed I was locked in the storage room. She had continued to pretend I was there, bringing food to the locked door to keep up the ruse. He doesn't suspect anything yet, but we need to act quickly before he realizes. Together, we devised a plan to locate Brian. Terry suggested planting a GPS tracker in Brian's favorite backpack. She would pass it to Mike, ensuring it would eventually reach Amy. If the backpack ends up at her place, we'll know where she's keeping him. I nodded, gripping my phone tightly, ready to monitor the GPS signal. Hours later, the signal moved. The location led to a high-rise luxury apartment building. Terry and I arrived and waited outside, observing the entrance. Finally, as evening fell, we saw them, Mike, Amy, and Brian, leaving the building. Brian! I called out before I could stop myself. Hearing my voice, Brian turned and broke into a wide smile. Mommy! He ran toward me, his tiny arms outstretched. I scooped him up, holding him tightly as tears streamed down my face. It's okay, Brian. Mommy's here now. I won't let you go again. The tender moment was interrupted by Mike's furious voice. How dare you show your face here? His face was red with rage as he stormed toward me. Brian belongs with us. He's the heir to the James family. You have no right to take him. Holding Brian close, I met their anger with unwavering resolve. Brian is my son. I won't let either of you take him again. I will hold you accountable for everything you've done, kidnapping Brian and imprisoning me. Accountable? Don't make me laugh. Do you know who I am? No one can touch me. I pulled a small recording device from my pocket and held it up. It had been recording their every word. At that moment, several police officers emerged from behind us. Mike James, Amy Hunter, please come with us. Mike froze, his confidence draining from his face. The officers moved in, and despite their protests, both were handcuffed and led away. Holding Brian tightly, I watched as the police cars drove off, the sirens fading into the distance. Brian clung to me, his little body trembling with tears. I'm so sorry, Brian, I whispered, but you're safe now. I missed you, Mommy. His small voice broke my heart, and I held him even closer, vowing never to let him go again. As I comforted Brian, I felt Terry step closer to us. Her face, for the first time in years, showed a softness I'd never seen before. Sarah, I'm so sorry for everything. And I have one more thing I need to do. Her tone was resolute, and I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean? I need to turn myself in. My eyes widened in disbelief. Terry, you don't have to do that. You helped us. You saved Brian and me. There's no reason for you to face punishment. That's not true, Sarah. I played a part in your suffering. I locked you in that storage room. Even if it was to protect Brian, I can't ignore my own actions. I tried to reason with her, but her resolve was unshakable. This is my way of atoning for everything I've done. Her voice was calm, but her words carried the weight of years of guilt and pain. With tears in my eyes, I watched as Terry walked toward the police officers who were still nearby. She calmly explained everything, from Mike's crimes to her role in locking me up. Her cooperation was instrumental in solidifying the case against Mike and Amy. Terry's honesty and regret earned her leniency in court. She received probation and community service instead of jail time. Mike and Amy, on the other hand, faced harsh sentences. The evidence Terry provided revealed years of embezzlement and corruption in Mike's business dealings. The scandal rocked his company, and Mike was stripped of his position and assets. Amy was found complicit in the crimes and faced her own punishment. Both of them were left to face the consequences of their greed and cruelty. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding a life for Brian and me. I invited Terry to live with us after she was released from her probationary obligations. At first, she hesitated. "Sarah, I don't want to impose on you and Brian. I've already caused enough harm." But I held her hand and looked her in the eye. "Terry, none of that matters anymore. Brian needs his grandmother, and I think we both need you too." Brian chimed in with a shy but determined voice. "I want Grandma to stay with us." His words seemed to lift the last bit of doubt from Terry's heart. She smiled softly and nodded. Our new life as a family of 3 began. Though the apartment was small, it was filled with warmth and love. Terry became an integral part of our lives, helping with Brian and managing the household while I worked. Brian grew closer to her, calling her grandma without hesitation and often seeking her comfort. Watching their bond grow was a source of healing for all of us. A few months later, we all visited Henry's grave together. Standing under a clear blue sky, we placed flowers on the gravestone. I knelt down and spoke quietly in my heart. "Henry, Brian is growing strong. Your mother is with us too. Rest easy, knowing we're safe and together." Beside me, Brian placed a small bouquet on the grave. "Thank you, Daddy." His small voice carried a weight of gratitude far beyond his years. Terry stood silently, her eyes closed as if offering a silent prayer. Despite the lingering pain of losing Henry, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I would protect Brian, nurture his happiness, and honor Henry's memory. On the way back, Brian held both our hands and looked up at us with a bright smile. "Let's visit Daddy again soon, Mommy, Grandma." His words brought smiles to both Terry and me. We have found a new beginning, a new strength, and a new family. And together we would build a future filled with love and hope.